Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Can't believe it, it's 2025. This will be our first video of the year. So we've done several other videos about what you need when the power's out. And go back and watch our older videos on that. Number one was light when it's dark. So we talked about kerosene lanterns. And next we talked about heat. Here we got a Coleman stove with a heater on the top here, and then we also talked about catalytic heaters, and all of these use white gas. Well, we're going to first talk about gasoline or white gas that we use in these appliances. So white gas, or just gasoline itself, was discovered in 1859 when they first started pumping oil. And they used a distilling process, and the main item that they wanted was kerosene, because kerosene lanterns and stoves and everything else. But gasoline was a byproduct and there was no need for it, so they used to just pour it out in fields and burn it. But in the late 1870s, gasoline engines were being invented and started to come onto the scene there, so they found that that was an excellent fuel for those. Early on they used coal gas, or just gas out of the ground there, and but you couldn't transport it or anything like that. You had to run lines to everything. So anyway, gasoline became the viable fuel and still is to this day. And so anyway, what we're going to be talking about today is, so we've got light and heat. Next thing we need is cooking. And number 4 will be water, but I'm not going to go into the water part of it. There's lots and lots of videos on that. But anyway, so we'll be right back when we're set up here. Okay, well, we're going to first start with a camp stove. This was a 1924, made by the AGM company, American Gas Machine. That was a company that was around forever. It started in 1910. And making different gas-powered appliances. In 1911 they came out with their first stove, very similar to this one. So anyway, I'll show you the components here. Got the grill here. I'm going to take the fuel tank out here. And this is the jet that sprays the fuel in. And here you can see a manifold and burners. The other interesting little bit on it here, it has legs, and these just pull down and out like that. And then these are the inside here, these little arms. Sticky little rascal. Okay, well, we got the stove set up here. We got our wind wings on here to protect the flame in a windy area. And we got the fuel tank here, the main jet here for the fuel to come out. And we have our grill. And then inside there you can see the burner assembly. There's a burner here and here, and then there's a cast iron manifold. And so this goes in here. I need to move this here out of the way first. And that comes in. It inserts into the manifold here. Okay, well, we're completely set up here. So we got fuel in here, and we got the fuel fill tightened, and we pumped it full of air, pressurized it. So the next thing we got to do, since these didn't have a regular generator on them, they hadn't really figured that out, so on top of this burner is a depression. We'll put either some fuel or alcohol in there. And we'll light it. And what that does is the tube that the flame is on there, it runs raw fuel in when it's cold, and you can't have raw fuel, you gotta have a vapor. And so what that'll do is preheat that tube, and once the alcohol burns out, then we open the burner up very lightly. This thing is very, very sensitive, so adjust the thing very carefully, and that'll burn the last of the alcohol out, and then we get a nice blue flame once the yellow's gone out of it completely. The adjustment on this thing is very, very touchy. This is the touchiest stove I've ever seen. But anyway, we'll get that burnt down and go back to a nice clean blue flame. And over on this side, we have a little butterfly valve. There you go, we got a nice blue flame there. I'll pull this out, and you can open this up and light the second burner. And put it right down here. One of the drawbacks on these early stoves like that, they're really touchy because the cast iron manifold has to heat up really well in order to keep the flame burning at a constant rate, because now I'm having to adjust it back and forth, trying to keep it burning at a reasonable rate. But it takes about 5 to 10 minutes sometimes for these things to be in full operation. And we've got a nice heat there. Open this one here. Cook. Okay, this is fully open. Close it off, and we'll have to cut the flame down on the other side there. And then this thing just pushes in and it's out of the way. So there you have a 1924 AGM Camp Stove. So now we have our fully operational 1924 KampKook model number 3. And to shut it off, I just close the valve and flame goes out. Cool it off and put it away. So we'll be back with a different stove and talk a little bit more about them. Okay, well, here's kind of a step up. If you got a big family or something, you're out camping or whatever, you need more stove than a little 2-burner one. Well, we got a 3-burner here. This is also a KampKook AGM stove, and this one is what's called a number 10, and it was produced in 1923. Kind of the differences on it is that the grates on this one are cast iron instead of steel rod like on the Model 3 that we just showed. And right here is what you open up to get the gas in. It has a fuel tank that goes on it too, just like the other one. And then on each end of it there's another one of these butterfly valves that you can open to get the different ones operating. But you're thinking back in the early 20s, that's pretty high tech. That's good stuff. These are really well made. So I'll move on to another one. Okay, well, here's another KampKook stove. This is a 1942 model. It's model number 2522, and you can see it's in really nice shape. Got the original decals still in it. It's a 2-burner stove. It has a round wire grate in it. Now the thing that we were talking about gasoline earlier, white gas, well, as internal combustion engines got better and had higher compression, put out more horsepower, this white gas wasn't adequate. Instead of burning, it would detonate and explode, and it could cause severe damage to the motors. And so they started adding additives in it, and they used alcohol and a lot of other things, propane, different stuff like that. But in 1923, General Motors, knowing of the problem their cars were having with the engines, discovered that tetraethyl lead added to the fuel would stop the detonation, and they could make the octane a lot higher. Now, early white gas like Coleman fuel is 50 octane, which is pretty low, and as the engines got bigger and more powerful, you know, the octane rating had to go up and up. And so it's interesting, like how it would affect things that you wouldn't even think about, like the farm tractors. You know, the early tractors, most of them ran on kerosene because, you know, kerosene was cheap, but it didn't make the horsepower that gas did. And so as tractors got bigger and needed more power, and they switched to gasoline, and you know, with the additives in the fuel, they could have a smaller, lighter tractor with a lot of horsepower and replace the big old slow-moving ones that low-speed engines. And like Oliver Corporation came out with a tractor that was called a Model 60, and it didn't have 60 horsepower. It was a small tractor, but that stood for a 60 octane fuel. And they came out with another one right after that. It was a 70 for 70 octane fuel. And so, like I say, the tractors made a lot more power and were smaller and cheaper. And you know, we have an Oliver 80. There again, it's rated for the octane of the fuel. And so octane was a very important thing, especially during World War II. Our aircraft in the latter part of World War II were superior to anything else in power and speed. And the reason for that was the gasoline that they were using. It went as high as 200 octane. And so they could, you know, when you get up in the air as thin, you know, 20, 30,000 feet, the fuel doesn't burn that good because there's lack of oxygen. So they would inject water into the system to get extra oxygen in it and use it extremely high octane fuel, which would burn in a condition like that. And so, but the end result was the additives in the fuels were detrimental to like stoves like this, because if you're trying to cook in an enclosed area, you got tetraethyl lead or other bad stuff in the fuel, you're going to be breathing it in. AGM came up with an interesting solution, which is this hollow device here, and there's a couple lines in here that circulate the fuel through it. And what it does, it heats the fuel up, and the lead deposits in this thing here, and you can actually take these apart and clean them, which I wouldn't recommend. Or what they used to do too is just sell you a new converter here. But so anyway, these stoves didn't have a generator that really worked. You know, Coleman was the one that really mastered that. But same process, you put alcohol or fuel down in the center of the burner and light it, preheats this, turns the fuel into a vapor. And the one thing on this stove that is interesting, you got two knobs here. This is the main fuel control here, and this is an air. And so once the generator here heats up enough to where the fuel almost is a vapor, you open this one turn. Of course, you pump it up. This has an actual pump in it instead of using a hand pump like the earlier ones. And you open this valve one turn, and it blows air in. And then you open this up to get the vapor going in, because this is hot. And when they run for about a minute, you shut the air off, and there's enough heat in the tube here to keep the fuel vaporized. And so interesting solutions. And I'll talk about Coleman stoves and the generators on those. I've talked about them some in previous video, but I did talked about single burner stoves. We showed the Colemans and a couple of others, European ones and whatnot. But anyway, it's just interesting, like anything else, how that over time things were developed, and and made stuff much better. And just think, no computers. People had to think. It's uncommon today. Okay, well, we've got the fuel in there in a burner to preheat it. It's starting to burn down, so we'll open this one turn. Open the main valve here. We'll let that burn for a little bit, and then we'll shut the air off here. So the yellow in there is basically the fuel I put in the heater cup of the burner there. And once that burns out totally, then the flame will just go to full blue. Okay, we'll turn that off. So we'll let that burn down and we'll be back. Okay, well, you can see the yellow flame is getting smaller as it warms up, and so we'll give it some more fuel here. It becomes less and less. This thing takes about 10 to 15 minutes to totally warm up before it'll have a pure blue flame, because the cast iron manifold takes a lot of heat. There you can see it's diminishing more and more. So, anyway, it's interesting that AGM is one of the first ones to put camp stoves on the market, and Coleman didn't put one out till 1925, but because of good marketing and stuff like that, Coleman became a prominent stove brand, and after World War II it pretty much took over the market totally. There you can see there's very little yellow flame. One thing about these two, they're really nice and efficient. Fuel lasts a long time on them. The only bad thing about it is the cost of the fuel today is high, but everything else is high too. But anyway, I'll shut this down and show you one more. It takes a little bit to burn down. So the fuel tank here, you just lift it off, and you lift up the grill here and put it in there when it's cold, obviously. You fold in your wind wings, and then you lay the top down, and then the legs here swing around and go over the top and lock it in place, and then you get a handle behind here to carry it so it's nice and compact. So we'll be back. Well, our last KampKook stove here, it's made in the 50s and through the 70s. Changed names a couple of times because they were bought out. Eventually Thermos company bought them out and sold them as Thermos stoves before they phased them out. Anyway, this is an LCS 21A, and the handle here, you pull it off to the side and then it opens up. Now this one just happens to be a new old stock, so we'll come over here and show you the stuff here. Now the burner in this one is almost 100% the same as the 1942 one we really showed. You got your shaft here and a butterfly to open the second valve there, for running the second burner. And here is the fuel tank. And again, this is the one that has two knobs, one on the side and the main fuel line. Of course, then you got your grill. Okay, then we got our wind wings here. And here's the original BS sheet. And you see they spell it with K instead of a C, so KampKook. And if you look at the back part of it, cook, that's what a lot of people think you are when you collect vintage camp stoves, me included. But anyway, it's just kind of a fun and useful hobby, and like I say, best to be prepared. So with me, you know, you can have 1 or 2 or 3 stoves. Well, I got quite a few more than that, but we won't talk about that. Then you can see the decal here. It's really nice since it's brand new, and there's a little disclaimer down here. But anyway, You can see how they modernized a lot of the stuff over the years, and just like cars or anything else, there's lots to know about them. Anyway, so that'll be it for today. So remember, vintage is best for us and most other people also. At some point down the road I'll do one on Coleman stoves and talk about the differences between the KampKooks and those. But anyway, we'll see you on the next exciting vintage video.